I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the midpoint. You'd said that it's a glimpse of the ending, but some people say it's one scene, or is it scene 55, or is it a sequence, or...
Okay, the function of the midpoint is, as I said, it's to give us a reasonable glimpse of the ending of the movie. And it often happens right in the middle. And in the classical sequence structure, you'll see it maybe at the end of the fourth sequence. So it's right, you have 4 before it and 4 after it, so it's right in the middle. It's not always at the end of a sequence. Sometimes you'll see it just before the ending of the sequence. But usually it's somewhere between 45% and 55% of the way through the movie. And it's a form of punctuation. As I said, if everything in the movie is at the same level of intensity, it gets boring. Even if there's a lot going on, it can still become numbing. So a midpoint culmination is a way to give the audience a glimpse and then take a breath and then spin off into the rest of the picture.
I guess my only question, maybe you can help me out, is as the sequences end and you hook into the next sequence of raising the stakes, tightening the noose a little more. Do you have any tips or things I could follow on that?
In terms of doing that escalation that I was talking about, it should flow naturally from the material. And maybe this is a good opportunity to talk about this, the issue of reversals. That I think one problem that screenwriters have is that they're afraid that if they don't control the character is going to leave the script. And they're going to be done after 60 pages. So there's a tendency to try to keep it all controlled. Now, when you're talking about escalating the stakes, all you got to do is let the character go and do whatever they want. And if you think they're going to leave the story, just use your imagination to come up with an obstacle that will thwart them from doing it and bring them back into where you want them to go. And so raising the stakes is simply a matter of letting the character follow what the character wants to do. And then when they try what they want to do, you, being God, can create a circumstance. Use your imagination to create some situation, unexpected result that leads to a bigger problem that they then have to solve. But I don't think you go far wrong if you understand that you can let the character go absolutely free, because you always have control. And that can be hard in a first draft. In a first draft, you're throwing it on the page and you're hoping against hope that it's all going to fit together. Once you're done with it and you get to the end where you want the film to end, then you can look back literally from God's point of view, see the whole life of the character, and then you can set them free to try all the different things they might try. And that's the key to a vital script and a story that really feels alive and the characters that are fully alive. So escalating the stakes should naturally come out of the character that you have and what they're going to try to do to solve their problem, and what imagination you have to thwart them.
You gave some great examples of being Toy Story, which I just happened to watch like 2 days ago, and being John Malkovich. Do you have some other movies that are great sequence movies? I mean, they might be, great 3 acts or great whatever, but specifically great sequence movies that I could watch?
Any movie that you see that tends to be episodic, like a journey movie, you'll be able to look at how the sequences go. A more recent one would be like The Fellowship of the Ring I mentioned a few times. It's about going from place to place. So I think there are some issues with that movie. I think there are some problems with the way the script was done. But if you want a more recent one that has that, then it was certainly, you'll see the pattern there. The classics that I like, if you look at any Billy Wilder movie, and I highly recommend it, they were working with sequences. And any of the classics, you'll notice that the pattern is there. In my book, I examine One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which you can see the different ways that the sequences are built. So that's worth looking at. Lawrence of Arabia, if you have a hankering for seeing a real masterpiece. That one, again, rather like the Fellowship of the Ring, it's an epic, and it is a journey. A lot of it is a journey. So you'll see how the sequences work. And it's useful to realize in looking at a movie like Lawrence of Arabia, it has 16 sequences, but it still has just 3 acts, because the acts are about setting up the main story. And the sequences really are independent of that. They're really about the little stories that are in there. And they still run about 15 minutes. I don't think Lawrence of Arabia, the longest one is probably not more than 20 in a 3-hour, 40-minute movie. And why do they stop at about 20 minutes? Because, as I say, the audience can get tired of one angle, one line of tension, one location. You get fatigued and you lose them. And I think a good example of that is in Saving Private Ryan, which has, overall, you can see where, it's a series of episodes, but the last battle scene, the second last sequence, I think, it runs about 31.5 minutes without interruption. And there's a lot going on there. And the world is falling apart. But I have to say, in watching it, I get numb, because it's just more, and there's no break in it whatsoever. And it may have been good in that case to give us a breather, give us an alternate ending, and then you come up and you finish it. So audiences can get tired.
Can you give us some history of the kind of the understanding of sequencing versus a lot of the other stuff that I've been learning about in this past 2 weeks?
The history, as I say, it begins with this, the writing by the reels. And you'll see that the pattern of that is present in movies in the 20s. And then in the 30s, actually, what happens is in 1927, talkies are born. And when talkies are born, you get the Hollywood producers turn to the experts in dialogue to add dialogue to their continuity scripts. So they turn to playwrights. Samson Raphaelson was one of those. He wrote the original stage play of The Jazz Singer. And so you wind up getting the influence of the Aristotelian model of playwriting, this notion of beginning, middle, and end, married to the sequence approach. And by the late 30s, you're seeing these playwrights mastering the form of cinema, and that's why between 39 and 44, you have an almost embarrassing number of classics come out from a country with half the population of this or less. You have an incredible number of classics. And it's because these playwrights are becoming masters at the form of screenwriting, and you wind up with incredible stories and incredible movies. By the time you get to the 50s, they're using the master scene layout or format for screenplays, and you get away from explicit sequences, and then it went out of fashion. And as I say, my mentor at Columbia was a fellow named Frank Daniel, and in the process of, he was aware of that history of sequencing, and in the process of mentoring many students, he ran into this problem. If you think in 3 acts, people get lost. Think in terms of smaller bits of film. And the more recent history of it, it was taught to me at Columbia. When Frank went to USC, it's been used there. And I teach now at Chapman University, so I've brought it with me along with some other colleagues. And people found it to be useful.
Paul, question.
Yes.
And it's funny, thinking about the sequence structure, it's almost like going from the world is flat to the world is round. It's just duh. It just makes sense. And then you say the midpoint should mirror second act break, that kind of, and that actually makes sense as well. So in terms of the sequences, positive beginning or negative resolution, et cetera, is there any kind of, that you've seen, in terms of the alternating positive, negative, in terms of those 8 sequences?
Okay. Well, what you find is that if it's a traditional dramatic structure, most of them end with some kind of negative resolution or some kind of twist that's unexpected. Within that, though, because constantly negative resolutions can be tedious, you will see reversals. So within the sequence, you can have, like in Toy Story here, you have what looks like a positive resolution, and then it goes negative. And that gain you see repeated in a lot of different variations. An example of a midpoint, again, that's very positive is from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where where he thinks he's free. He's persuaded everybody that it's great, you know, that I fooled them, they think I'm crazy, I'm out of here in 66 days. And it's a really positive outlook. And then just after that, he's told, no, they're keeping you here until they're darn well ready to let you go. So suddenly, things are much darker, but you get this positive, apparently positive resolution to the movie, and it spins negative. But you'll see that all the way through in different variations. It isn't just bound to sequences. But usually at the end of the sequence, you'll see a negative resolution, because if it's positive, the movie's over. So it's usually something negative, but you do get variation.